This is the second lesson on formative assessment. We've introduced the concept of formative assessment. Now we need to look at some principles to keep in mind. First, you need to keep your goals in mind when you're doing formative assessment, in fact, when you're doing all instruction. One thing that can help would be if you think about the letters KUD for knowledge, understanding, and doing. You should be clear in your mind what you want your students to know. That's generally factual knowledge. What you want them to understand. That's going to be generally higher level thinking. Or what you want them to be able to do. That would be skills. If you're clear about that, then your formative assessment will be designed that way. For example, if your goal is a skill that students have the skill to be able to set margins in a Microsoft Word paper, then your formative assessment will not be as effective if you ask them what a margin is, unless you're dealing with really young children. You want them to demonstrate a skill, not define a term. So you want to keep your goals in mind. Next, you should make sure your students understand the goal, and especially, I'm not thinking just about the specific instructional goal like on the last slide, but the goal of formative assessment in general. Your students need to understand that formative assessment is not a test, that it's not for a permanent grade, and you don't expect them to get everything right the first time. You can tell them it's kind of like when they learned how to ride a bike. They fell down, they tried again, they fell down again, they kept trying until they mastered it. Formative assessment serves the same purpose. You want to see what they have learned and what they haven't learned so that you and they can correct their errors. Some of your high-performing students might especially have trouble with this. They're used to getting everything right. They're used to having all A's on all their tests, and if you give them some type of assessment that they don't get an A on, they don't get everything right, they're going to get upset if you have them do something. Assure them they're still learning the process, they haven't mastered it yet, and that they will get better by the time of the test. Now, when you give feedback on formative assessment, it needs to be informative and specific. This type of feedback you see here, just could do better, doesn't give any help at all. You need to help the students know specifically how they can improve, what they need to fix. Even when you say things like, great job, that doesn't really help. Tell them specifically what they did well. For example, you did a good job of making your first sentence in each paragraph tell me what the paragraph was going to be about. When you're specific like this, it helps the students grow and helps them learn more. Now, you don't have to deal with every error all the time. Focus on the main things. Focus on the big things that will help your student come up to the next level. Now, for your better students, this might be picky details, because this is where they can improve. For a weaker student, it might be the things that are the most strong, and you just leave other things alone till later. Now, you also need to be user-friendly with your feedback, not like this one. You know, the teacher's writing, she just says, I quit, I'll have a stroke if I keep reading. Now, you might have a relationship with a student where occasionally you might do something like this, but this isn't effective feedback. You know, there may be a different reason for that, but this is not feedback. You want the students to think about how to improve. You don't want them just to feel bad about their work. One writer said the ideal is to elicit a cognitive response from the learner, not an emotional response. There are times when you want to encourage your students with praise. There are times when you want them to feel bad about what they've done, although that's generally in an ethical context, such as they were lazy or they plagiarized. But formative assessments should focus on provoking the students to think about what they did right or wrong, not primarily to feel a certain way about it. Now, another tip here is you should engage the students in their own formative assessment. Teach them how to do this for themselves. One way is through the use of rubrics like this. Give them the rubrics ahead of time, and then show them how to use rubrics to assess their own work. You can sit down with the student and say, okay, which level of this do you think your work matches? And then you can get the students involved in thinking of ways to improve. You could say, what could you change in this paragraph to bring it up to this level on the rubric? See, what you're wanting to do is that you want to teach the students to start learning how to look for ways on their own to improve their work, and not just wait passively for you to point things out for them. You want them to start assessing their own work. As you look over formative assessments, you want to see patterns. Start seeing things that are repetitive or patterns of mistake. If you see a group of students making the same mistake, then you'll know to address that with the class. Maybe you adjust your instruction, or maybe you just correct that one misunderstanding. If you see one or two students miss something, maybe you just take them aside separately and work with them. But look for patterns of errors. So, how do you plan formative assessment? Well, you need to think of something that's going to pull out from the students what their level of understanding is. It takes work. You almost can never tell whether a student understands just by looking at them. Sometimes you might see a quizzical look on their face. But if you just ask, does everyone understand? Or does anyone have any questions? That is not going to help you. It's not going to tell you anything. You know that almost no students are going to respond to questions like that. Either they don't want to be embarrassed in front of their friends by admitting they don't understand, or they don't want their friends to blame them for holding up the class. You've seen this type of thing. Oh, she's got another question. I'm ready to move on. Or what often happens is your students don't even know that they don't understand. They might think they've followed everything and think they've totally understood, when really they've missed the concept altogether, and they're so clueless they don't know that they don't know. So you need to come up with other ways to find out who understands and who doesn't. Ways to draw that out of them. You're going to need effective ways to find this out. You all know that about the Sunday school questions where it seems like the answer is always God or Jesus. You ask kids, who do we always obey? God. Who rose from the dead? Jesus. But this doesn't tell you anything about their understanding. You need to ask questions that really show student understanding. The thing is, you're not going to be able to develop these on the spot. They take planning. You need to think, how can I ask a question, or how can I give my students something to do here that will show me if they have learned the material? You want to think, how can you ask a question that won't give away the answer? How can you ask something that discriminates between those who understand and those who don't? Where if a student can answer this correctly, they understand. If they don't understand, they won't answer it correctly. How can you ask something that gets at the heart of the lesson and not just a peripheral side issue? These types of things need thought ahead of time, and so you need to plan them out. You also are going to want something that can take place quickly. When you're dealing with formative assessments, you want something that you can get through quickly. You can't take time to give a 20-minute quiz every day. You want things that can just be done in a minute or so, which then frees you up to do it more frequently. Similarly, you want something that you can do often. Formative assessment doesn't do much good if you only do it every 2 weeks. After that amount of time, the students have mentally moved on, you moved on to other material. You don't want to get after 2 weeks and find out that the students missed something 2 weeks ago. You want to be able to deal with it on the spot. So you want to have some way to check for understanding practically every lesson, or even several times a lesson. You need to know their understanding frequently enough so you can see problems as soon as they arise and you can deal with them at that point. And you need quick turnaround on your feedback. When you give a test at the end of a quarter or you give a research paper or something, it takes you time to grade that, and that's understandable. But for formative assessment, you need something that's going to give you quick feedback. It doesn't do you any good if it takes you a week to score it or to see what the students have misunderstood. You need something that gives you and the students instant or almost instant feedback so you can address problems on the spot before you go much further into the material. You don't want to get to the end of a long section on long division, for example, only to find out that half the students don't even know the basic division facts. Finally, you need something that's going to give you information about all your students. This is the problem when you just ask a single question verbally. You get one student who answers it right, and then you have no idea how many other students know the answer, and many of them don't. Maybe you just randomly hit on the one student who understands it. Effective formative assessments needs to give you feedback about all your students, not just one student, and not just a few of them. So let me know if you have any questions. Drop me an email. In the next session, we're going to look at some specific methods of effective formative assessment. We'll get into some of the practical issues. So I hope this is helpful for you.